I'm trying to find out how to get that thing on the side of the...
Well, are you ready, George? I don't know what you're saying.
Or ring the bell.
It's on.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Saint House of Wine.
Pray
In
for us.
the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, for those people who have not been here, we are starting on this book by Garrigou-Lagrange called Life Everlasting, and as a subtitle it's got "And the Immensity of the Soul." Now we started on this last week, and it deals with the last things: death, judgment, heaven and hell. And so we started on it. It tells you a lot. We started with a bit of psychology on the senses and the soul. And last week we talked about the senses and sensations. There are two ways in which a man knows. So knowledge in man is acquired either through the intellect or through the senses. And we divided the senses into the external senses, that are the senses that you know, touch, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and the internal senses, which are sense consciousness, imagination, memory, and estimative power, or in animals called the instinct. So, and we said that the act of these and then I talked about the appetitive power in man, appetite in man, and we have, for appetites, we have sense appetite, and intellectual appetite. So this is divided in two, and we have the irascible appetite and the concupiscible. And the intellectual appetite is called will. So the will is not a knower, it's a goer. It goes for things, it doesn't know anything. The acts, these appetites, you see, we said that every knowledge always is followed by some inclination, that we cannot acquire a knowledge that leaves us completely indifferent. We are going to like it or hate it or whatever we know, hope for it or be sad about it or be angered by it or whatever. And these movements of the sense appetites are called the passions. And we saw that the passions are the movements which start from these two, we call them the passions. The movements which start in the will and go down, there is two-way traffic, because man is one whole thing, not two things. So if I love something with my will, I will eventually love it also with my sense appetite. If I start loving something with my sense appetite, because I sense that it is good, then I'll also love it with my will. So there's two-way traffic. If the passion starts here in the senses, the movement starts there, we call it a passion. If it starts there, we call it an emotion. And we have 11 passions and 11 emotions. So that's only by way of repetition. No? So we have love, the passions and emotions are love and hatred, desire and aversion, sadness, and joy. And then these belong to the concupiscible appetite. And then we have in the other one hope and despair. So these belong to the concupiscible. Hope and despair, courage and fear and anger. And there are only 5 here, and they belong to the irascible. Now, when it comes to the will, the emotions have the same name exactly as these. And when it comes to the will, well, the 11 of them belong to the will because we have only one intellectual appetite, because it covers so much more universal than the sensitive appetite. And I explained that is why we have many senses, but one intellect, because the intellect covers everything that the senses cover. In other words, the object of the senses is much more restricted than that of the intellect. So the higher the thing is, the more sublime it is, the fewer of it you need. So we have only one intellect, but many senses. We have only one intellectual appetite, but two passions, 2 sense appetite. And so all the emotions are by the same name as the passions. It depends whether they go from up to down or from downwards upwards, which way they are going. So in the animals, you haven't got emotions, strictly speaking. You have only passions. So passions are movements of the sense appetite. Now the senses and the intellect, as I said, are powers for knowledge. Therefore, they are only knowers. They're not goers. They're only knowers. Now, the reaction you get from that knowledge, the movement towards it or away from it or whatever, that's called a passion. An appetite. If it starts in the sense appetite, this is a passion. If it starts in the intellect, it's an emotion. So man has passions and emotions, but animals have only passions. Only passions.
Well, that when the dog wags his tail when he's happy.
Well, no, it's not an emotion because it didn't start in the will. When it starts in the will, for example, you see, the will is an intellective appetite, so I'll better explain. See, what do you know with your intellect? We are going to have a look at that tonight. With your intellect, you know universal things, you know what things are, you know essences. So that's a universal knowledge, and the will, if you love something that you know only with your intellect, that you don't know with your senses, for example, justice. You know justice with your senses? Does your dog know justice? No. So if you love it, that will be an emotion. And then you will feel something for it as well. From there, so that movement, that way, that's an emotion. And the movement that way, that's a passion. So if your dog, or if you love something, that because you see it as beautiful and you love it, so it started with your senses. Your senses were the first that were attracted to it, like a lovely cake when you're hungry. Then that's a passion. But then your will desire it too. See, they work together. So then that is a passion. Am I making it clear? Okay. So now we saw that the emotions and the passions can be very, very strong, because we saw that even in animals, they, say the lion wants to eat the lamb or whatever, or the antelope. It's just a joke, really. Yeah.
Tell them the joke.
We had this doctor at the academy, Dr. Pearce. He wasn't a priest. He was just a medical man. He was a doctor, and he used to teach, and he had a very funny ways of putting things. And he used to say, "Well, in the real, the lion eats the antelope. But in the mind, the lion takes the predicate carnivorous." So you see, if you talk about carnivorous, that's something you understand. In the mind, you say it's carnivorous. But what happens in the real? The lion is eating the antelope. So that was our sign anyway. So we have the lion has. He gets angry, he checks, and it's pretty powerful. The emotions are very powerful. They lead the animal to look for his food and to fight and to do all kinds of things, don't they? So this is, you see, what we are trying to work up to, is to show that the soul has a great depth. The soul has a great depth already in the animal. It is visible. But when we come to the will, then it's going to be infinite. So this is the thing. Now, this width and depth of passion is still more immense in man, because man's intellect grasps universal good and man's will desires that boundless good. So I'll explain that. Now, you see, our intellect, because it knows things in the abstract, it knows an abstract good. So in intellect, we have the understanding of good, abstract. So no particular good is excluded from that. See, when you understood good in what we call the universal, without limit, goodness. Everything. You can have a good man, you can have a good angel, you can have a good God, you can have anything that's good can come under that. But sense does not know good, it only knows this good. And that means that it knows a singular good. The lion only knows this antelope. Then he sees another one, he knows this one. He doesn't know what an antelope is, and that's why he can't define antelope, and that's why he can't talk. So you see, we understand good, and therefore we understand infinite good, without limit. Does good have a limit? Any God. Couldn't be God. Could be God. Goodness can have anything under it. We show in other places that everything God created is good, and God is good. And that's what we call a transcendental concept. It transcends the world, it goes even to God and the spiritual world and angels and so on. So once we understand, and remember what we said, no, it's impossible to have knowledge without having a movement of appetite following that knowledge. So when we understand infinite good, we will it. We cannot help it. That's why every man wills to be happy. I don't think there's anybody here who can truthfully say, I don't mind if I'm unhappy. You see? Why? Because the same with happiness. Happiness is a good that we understand without limit. And so we all necessarily will to be happy. The only trouble with happiness is that it is abstract. You see, it's something abstract. So then we have to decide, well, what does it consist in? We have to materialize it. So when I have an abstract idea of happiness, well, then I have to decide how am I going to achieve this happiness? By pursuing wealth, or by pursuing pleasure, or by pursuing spiritual good. That's where men differ. They all agree on happiness. They all want to be happy. That's abstract. But when they come to put it in the concrete and say, well, what is my happiness going to consist in, or what does happiness consist in? There they differ very greatly, don't they? And some say it consists in wealth and some in power. Now what, he got more to say about this later on, but what he's trying to say here, you see, he quotes St. Thomas and says, passion, says St. Thomas, when it is truly natural, that is founded on man's nature, cannot be boundless, because it desires only what nature demands, and the sense good which nature demands is limited, in food, for instance, and drink. So you see, that's why an animal hasn't got to this insatiable desire that man has, because he's only got sense knowledge, only that, not that. He's only got sense appetites, and sense knowledge is limited. See, he only knows this good. He only doesn't know good in general. So he only follows this good. When he gets this good that he's after, he's satisfied. He doesn't know anymore. He's satisfied, he's contented. And so, until, say the lion eats the antelope, then he gets hungry again, he wants another one. But until that happens, he is quite contented. And therefore he doesn't go and kill 1,000,000 antelopes, or as many as he can get. He's satisfied with one, say. But man has a will, and his will can go for infinite good. I'll explain that further later on. So he's not satisfied with one thing, because no matter how much he wants the thing, and this I think is the story of all of us, we might desire something very vehemently with very great passion, and when we get it, we're disappointed. It doesn't fulfill all our longing and our desire. I'm sure this has happened to everyone. Why? Because as soon as we get it, we realize this is limited. This is not infinite good. St. Thomas, I think, is the one, I don't know, it says later on. He says even if we saw an angel with all his beauty, we would still, we might be overwhelmed for a while and think how lovely he is, but it wouldn't take long to say, you have to get more than that. We are not so. The desire of the animal is never infinite. And when that desire is fulfilled, we call it contentment, not happiness. We have an idea that it's not the same thing as man's. We call it contentment. And contentment is very different from happiness. So he's contented. In other words, his senses and his sense appetites are satisfied for a while. Man wouldn't be happy with that. He can have all the food he has and all the pleasure he wants and everything. He still wants more. See, he wants more. Now, in a good man, this is what I'm thinking. Unnatural desire, on the contrary, unnatural desire means a desire which is not according to the nature of man. Say, the desire of the miser for money. Why does a miser like money? That's right, he likes the money itself, the thing. We all like money. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't like money.
It's terminal, it's finished.
To him, that's it. No matter how much he has, he wants more. That is the same as the glutton. The glutton likes food. He likes to eat the food, not just to nourish himself. Now, if the man who wants money, the miser loves money for its sake. So it's not wrong to love money, is it? But money is a means. It's not an end. Money is a means. Money is so we can use it to buy things, to buy what we need. To love money for the sake of money is making an end of a means. You follow? And that's always wrong. So that's unnatural. Now, if man happens to have unnatural desire and unnatural passions, because he has the will, he can make that infinite. The miser that is not satisfied with having a bag full of money, then he wants two, and when he has two, he has three, and when he has three, he wants more. He's never satisfied. You see, that's what he's saying here. So unnatural desire can be unlimited because it arises from reason gone astray, which sees unlimited good in a good which is in reality limited. You see, money is really a limited good. Food is a limited good. But the miser, because he loves it so much and then his will comes to play, as I said, they work together, then he makes that his end instead of a means. And therefore, it becomes an unlimited desire. Thus, a man who desires wealth can desire it in limitless measure. He can see in wealth the ultimate purpose of his life. And there are many people like that. Natural desire, then, in animal and man is limited. The animal, when it is sated, no longer seeks prey. But intelligent man, when depraved, conceives and pursues ever more wealth and pleasure. Hence quarrels among neighbors and endless wars among nations. The miser is insatiable, likewise the man of pleasure and the man of power. Love, when thwarted, begets hate, and that hate becomes boundless. Now you see, the hate that it begets is a hate towards the thing that's thwarted him, and it'll be in exact proportion to his love. So if a man loves something very much, and then it goes sour on him, he'll hate it very much, in proportion, you see. So, hence, I read, love when thwarted begets hate, and that hate becomes boundless. Hate, says Baudelaire, who's a French author, is the cask, I don't know, who was Danaides? It's explained here, these Danaides, or whatever they call them, says mythology slew their husbands on their wedding night, hence were condemned to fill a cask without bottom. Endless punishment of boundless depravity. So man becomes like that. He's like, tries to fill a cask without bottom. Now what Garrigou is saying, if passions which man shares with beasts be so deep and wide, what must be the depth and breadth of the will, which is a spiritual faculty common only to man and angels? And so the next chapter is will and intellect, to see the depth of the will. See, passions are very strong and can drive the animal very forcefully to what he wants, but what can the will do? And so now we have to have a look at the will. Few people reflect deeply on the superiority of the intellect over the imagination, or of the concept over the accompanying sense image. I'll have to explain that. Now, you see, when we I'll take this off. We are on intellect and will now, and we are on human intellect actually, because how many kinds of intellects have we got? Eh? Well, divine and human? Aren't you missing someone? Aren't there other intellectual beings besides God and man?
Angels.
Angels, all right. So the intellects are divine intellect, angelic intellect, and human. Now we're talking about the human. I'll have to say something about that. First of all, the intellect is a power for understanding, and not sensing, understanding. Now when we understand, so in intellect, we have understanding, and we understand through the forming of ideas or concepts. They are the same thing. So we form concepts to understand. This is what the intellect does. So the intellect can know things that the senses never know. It can know things in the abstract. For example, intellect can know, I said justice before, didn't I? An animal wouldn't have a hope of understanding justice, for example. Not at all. He might be jealous, yes, but not because he understands justice. Because he wants... So a man can understand, when he understands, a king can understand universals. But before I go into that, I'll just give you the distinction between these. Now, each intellect, all intellects are made to know being. That's the object of all intellects. They have to know being. But the divine intellect, what it knows first, and through which it knows everything else, is the divine being. The divine being. Something like, take your eye. The eye is made to attain color, isn't it? And what it knows first is color. It knows the redness of that, doesn't it? And because it knows color, it knows everything else that it knows. Can you see other things besides color? Can you see the movement? Yeah, you can see the shape, you can see the size, you can see the movement, you can see the repose, you can see the quantity, you can see those things. But why? Because you see the color. If you didn't see color, you wouldn't see those other things, would you? You wouldn't see movement. You wouldn't see shape. So you see the shape of that now. Why? Because you see the color. Right? Now, everything that so whatever sight knows through color. It's what it attains first, and that through which it knows everything else that it knows. Now, God is like that with the divine being. What God knows and what he knows best is himself. The first thing he knows is himself. And through knowing himself, he knows what? Everything else. Through the knowledge of himself, he knows everything else that he knows. So God doesn't have to be looking at you, Carmel, to see what you're doing. He only looks at himself and he knows what you're doing. He knows what he's making you do and think and so on. So he doesn't have to be hanging out of the high window of his tower to see what you're doing, would you? He knows what we say, the formal object of the divine intellect is the divine being. Now, what the angel knows best, and through which he knows everything else that he knows, is angelic being. So what he understands best is himself, and when he wants to understand God, he'll have to say, oh, he's something like me, but he's better than me. Right? And when he wants to understand man, he'll say, oh, he's something like me, he has an intellect and a will, but he's less than me. And he compares everything with his knowledge of himself. That's what he knows best. And that's the medium through which he knows everything else that he knows. Now when we come to the poor human intellect, it's the least of all intellects, I'm afraid to say. The doc used to preach us this and then say, this will take the starch out of you. So, we come to our poor human intellect. What do we know best? We don't even know human beings best. We don't. We have to go and study man, don't we? We don't. What do we know best? What do you think we know? We attain first, and is that being the medium of everything else we know?
Ourselves.
No? Knowing material things.
What we know through our senses.
Oh yes. Yeah, well, but material things.
And what else?
Yeah, material things. So what they are, essences of, or natures of material things. So, you know, what man knows best is, yes, what he sees through his senses, only he understands them. For example, we understand color. You see what St. Thomas says is sight knows color. But intellect knows what color is. It's a difference, isn't it? We understand what color is. So sense only goes up skin deep. Doesn't go any deeper than that, you know. All he knows, the dog already knows this whiteness. That's it. He can't say that's a ball. He doesn't know. He doesn't go enter into the nature of the thing. He's right up on the surface. And so that's St. Thomas puts that as the distinction between sense and intellect. Sense only knows color, but intellect knows what color is. Now, this human intellect of ours too, being the lowest of all intellects, on the lowest rung of the ladder of intellects, so we are way down, although the Bible says that God created man only a little lower than the angels. I don't know, that little must be pretty big anyway. We are a little lower than the angels. Now, we know material things. In other words, I know a dog and a cat and a rock and milk and water and whatever. But how do I know it? I also, not only I know inferior beings to these, you see, so this is the being of material things because it's about being. All intellects are about being. But also, I don't know them as well as the others know. For example, God knows everything perfectly. The angel doesn't have senses. Angelic beings don't have senses because they don't have a body. So how do they know? God, intellect, but how does their intellect work? Infused by God. Yes, God gives them an idea of everything that He creates. So they know things perfectly too. Completely perfect, not as perfectly as God. Now, we come to us. How do we get ideas? Through our senses, that's right. So all our knowledge begins in sense. And it begins in external sense. So that if we had somebody born without any external senses functioning, that person would never understand anything in this life. In the next life, yes, well, he might, but he will too. But in this life, no, because our intellect has no contact with reality outside of us, except through the senses. The senses are the windows of the soul. And my intellect can't look out because if my senses don't work, it has no windows. It's locked in forever. It can't function forever in this life, I mean. I don't mean in the next. All right. So, you see, my intellect has to get its concepts through the senses. So, first the external senses. In other words, I must see or hear or smell or taste something. And then through the internal senses, which we'll call imagination. We group the three of them and call them imagination. One of them we put with these. So we have, my knowledge starts here and it goes there, and that presents it to the intellect, and the intellect gets to work on that information, and it abstracts the nature of the thing out of it. For example, we see, somebody sees a dog. So the dog goes first through his sight, then through his imagination, that means the internal senses, and then that's presented to the intellect, and the intellect gets to work on that. We explain all that in psychology, but I can't go give a psychology course. It will take me 2 years to do it. So the intellect gets to work on that image. These are imagining senses. They produce an image. An image means something, a similitude of what you see, right? So there is an image. Every time you see, we talk about this red pen, you see this pen, your eye makes contact with it, and then it goes in your internal senses, and there is an image produced in your imagination. That's a material thing. And so it is the image of this pen. But then the intellect gets to work on that image and produces an idea in it, which is a representation of this pen, and it is similitude of the pen. But when I understood pen, I didn't only understand this pen, I understood every pen that ever existed. When you see this, what have you seen? Only this, haven't you? Or this dog, yeah? This, singular. This dog, which I will say he is brown, with curly hair, and what? 1 foot tall. Anyway, that will do. Yeah, but you all have 1 foot. Right? All right, 1 foot. 1 foot tall. Now this dog, my eye only sees this one. Yes, let's say he is, suppose he is, what will we say he is? A collie or a terrier or whatever you like. Well, I've seen this dog, this terrier. What's gone in my imagination? This terrier. The image is the same as that outside. But what goes, when my intellect works on that and forms an idea of what a dog is. And in that idea, I've understood not only this dog, I've understood every dog that existed, exists, or will ever exist.
To be able to recognize it.
Yeah. So you see the power of intellect over sense. The intellect understands dog. Now, if I say to you, describe dog, can you? You can describe this dog. You can't describe dog.
Describe a breed, but not
a breed, yeah. So a breed will be this breed. You see, singular. So you can't describe dog. It's the same way as if I say to you, instead of dog, if I put animal. If I say describe animal, now try. You can only define it, can't you? Because one might describe a giraffe and the other describes a mouse. They're both animals, aren't they? So you understand what an animal is. What have you done? You have abstracted what is essential from all the particular things here. You just took out of all that. You dropped the brownness. You dropped the curly hair because a dog might be black and it might have straight hair and it might be only a little chihuahua, not 1 foot tall, but you've kept what makes a dog be a dog. That's what we call the nature of dog. What? nature, and you understand that, and then you can refer that back to any dog that you see, whether he's a big Dane, a Great Dane, or a little Chihuahua. You say that's a dog. You understood what dog is, and your concept of dog befits.
What's your memory? What's memory? That's not the sentence.
Is it rolling?
Because they realise that they have seen that education, but it's going to be a lot.
All right, ready to start?
May we?
Now, I was talking about the difference between the image in the imagination. This produces an image, but this produces a concept or an idea. So the difference between these two, the image and the concept. The imagining senses are the imagination, the memory, and the estimative, and we group them together and call them the imagination. The external senses are the intuitive senses, in other words, those senses that have to know a thing in its existence. I can't see a light there unless there is a light there, but I can imagine, I don't know, a pink elephant or something, and there isn't one. I can imagine that. So the imagining senses are not intuitive senses. They and the intellect is not an intuitive power of knowledge either, because I can understand things don't exist, can't I? All the inventors did that. They understood things before they invented them, didn't they? Rocket to the moon, for example. Now what happens, said the external senses make contact with the thing. That thing forms an image. An image is formed, this is putting it very briefly, an image is formed in the imagination. The intellect gets to work on that, because that's presented to the intellect. The intellect works on it and forms a concept or an idea, which is not the same thing as the image, but they are there together. Every time I conceive something, I form an image in my intellect. If I say, just imagine the harbour bridge, you form an idea of the harbour bridge. So they work together. If you imagine the harbour bridge, you form an idea of it. If you have an idea of it, you start with the idea, you still have an image in your imagination. They work together, but they are not the same thing. Now, the image is always of this thing. For example, the harbour bridge, if you imagine the harbour bridge is going to be that coat hanger shape, isn't it? Otherwise it wouldn't be that one, it'd be another one. But when you understand bridge, have you understood necessarily a coat hanger shape? No, it could be any shape at all, couldn't it? It could be a long one or a short one or a high one or a low one or whatever. So narrow or wide. So that is the difference between the universal and the singular. How it happens, Aristotle explained that. He said that, you see, we drop all the particulars, for example, of the harbour bridge, the shape, the construction of metal, because a bridge could be wooden, couldn't it? I dropped the size, and I dropped the width, and I dropped the colour, and I just understand what a bridge is, naked, of all, you know, apart from all these thisnesses, all this thing. It's the same as if I say to you, animal. Imagine, well, you formed the concept animal, but with that concept, there is an imagination of an animal. But it could possibly be, I don't know, that everybody in the class has imagined a different animal. But the concept is the same. You see, we all have understood the same thing, but we don't all imagine the same thing. Therefore, the concept and the image are not the same. What did you imagine, Tony?
TNU.
What did you imagine, Chris? An armadillo. Here you are. And you? A giraffe. Nothing in particular, might be just the word, animal, but something is imagined, you see. And what is understood, though, is the nature of animal. What is understood is a living being, living by sensitive life only. I have to put a stop there because it hasn't gotten the lecture. We all understood that, but we all imagine different things. Now, where is the difference? The difference is this, that this one contains all the thisnesses. This animal, for example, this giraffe of this size, at this time, in this place, of this color, with this markings, all that. Whereas the idea hasn't got that, it's dropped all that and kept only what is necessary for an animal to have, or a giraffe in this case to have. And therefore it is far superior to the sense. You see, he says the mind or the intellect, the same thing, differs from all sense powers, external and internal, because it has a primary object, not mere accidental facts. Accidental facts means all these thisnesses, this color, this thing. He says external or internal color, for example, sound or touch, whatever. The intellect just understands what an animal is, or what actually, can just animal exist in the real? An animal, which is neither a giraffe nor a horse nor a worm nor a gnu, can it exist in the real?
No.
Where does it exist? In the mind. It's a real concept, it's a real nature, it's a real idea, but it exists only in your mind. Out in reality, every animal is this animal. It's either a giraffe or a cockroach or a butterfly or whatever it is. So you see that the intellect is not only superior to the senses, and it's not a superior sense. It's not. You see, there are some philosophers, and I'm afraid I think this is what they teach at the university, is that the intellect is just a superior sense. It only classifies things, and to get at them scientifically and so on. Yeah, but it's not anything of a different nature from the senses. Whereas you see, the intellect is an entirely different way, or a different power of knowledge from the senses. Completely. The intellect can know what a thing is. In other words, natures or essences. It knows what things are. The senses don't know what things are. They know what they look like, or they smell like, or they feel like, or they sound like, or whatever. That's all the senses know. And that's all the imagination knows too. Therefore the imagination can be sick, But can your intellect be sick? What about those mental diseases? Here's one for you, Alex. Can your mens or your intellect, your mind, be diseased?
It'd be limited rather than diseased.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly limited compared to the angels and the others. And it is true that some have a better intellect than others. But in its way of knowing,
Debilitated?
well, debilitated, what does that mean? Weak, sick,
Injured.
injured. Well, just think. Is the intellect a part of your body? In your body, do you have an organ of your intellect? No. Well, it's a spiritual power there, isn't it? It's a spiritual power, and it belongs to you, the soul only. There's no organ of intellect. Your power of sight, what does it belong to? Your body or your soul?
Body.
Soul.
Soul.
You see it.
Can you see without an organ?
No.
Sense.
It's a sense.
Can you see without the soul?
No.
No. If you have a good organ and it's dead, it's dead. So it belongs to both. For the senses to work, they need two things. They need the organ, which is provided by the body. It's a material part. And they need the power, which is provided by the soul, which is spiritual soul. I'll put spiritual. Soul, because animals have got. Which is provided by the soul, right? So if we have a dog without eyes, he can't see because he has no organs of sight. But if you have a dead dog with good organs, he can't see either because he has no soul. So it comes from both of them. It's like that tube there. You've got to have the tube, don't you? And you've got to have the power to have light. Without the tube and the power alone, doesn't work. And without the tube, without the power, doesn't work either. So, but when we come to the intellect, there's no organ. There's only the soul. You see, the intellect is not like these sense organs or powers. It's just what we call a spiritual power. So we have only two spiritual powers in ourselves, and they are no organs for these powers, and they are the intellect and the will. Now, why can an organ, why can for example, you have a defective power of sight? What makes it go wrong? Where's the trouble? In the organ or in the soul? In the organ. What happens if you have no organ? Well, if every time the power doesn't work as it should work, the trouble is with the organ.
But Alice, what if people, hallucinate and see things that don't exist?
Will you please leave those pathological cases out for the time being? The trouble is in their imagination. Now, the organ, where was I?
Intellectually decided that.
Yeah, if your power of sight is defective, the trouble is with the organ. And every disease is with the organ, isn't it? Can anything be wrong with the soul? No. Now, when you have a spiritual power without an organ, it can't have a diseased organ. because it can't have a disease in it. So therefore, the intellect cannot be sick. No such thing as mental illness. Really? Really. Those people that are mentally sick are sick in their internal senses probably, or their internal senses, or something there in the body. The trouble is with the body, and that's the job of the doctor to find out where the trouble is. The trouble is with the body, but the soul cannot get sick because the soul cannot die either. And your intellect cannot die, and your will cannot die because they belong to your spiritual soul. And that's why when we die, that's why we have to go through all this, because we have to see. When we die, our intellect and our will are gone with our soul. We can still understand all the things we understood here and more, and we will see later on how a separated soul can understand and communicate with other separated souls and with God and with the angels. But you see, because these powers belong to the soul alone, they are still intact after death.
Alison, something else that makes that also seem reasonable for another point of view is that chemicals can alter the way that we talked about people that have got mental problems and that sort of thing. Certain chemicals can be used to help control their moods or whatever. People that are on alcohol and drugs, it affects their mental faculties and so on. But as you say, it's to their intellect.
It doesn't affect the intellect.
That's right.
All drugs can only work on the body.
Yes.
They can't work on your soul except indirectly. So you see, now when we say that somebody, for example, has a mental disease, what is wrong is something with his imagination, or if people cannot see, might be with their power organ of sight or whatever. That's the job of the doctor to go find out what is wrong with them. But you see, the imagination, all the organs there, which I said the imagination are imagining senses are the imagination, the memory, and the estimative. And the other one, the sense consciousness, that goes with the external senses because it's intuitive. Now, those can be sick because there is such a thing as an organ somewhere in the brain of your imagination, and there is such a thing, they are organic, that's why they are senses. That's the difference between sense and intellect. You follow? An intellect, therefore, cannot be sick. That's why when we are so sick and we die, and our soul leaves the body, the intellect is just in perfect condition. It's not sick at all. The body was so sick that it died, but the intellect and the will are intact. They are as good as when they came from the hand of God.
With the sick mind or the sick imagination or whatever, the intellect is clouded or
Yes.
doesn't function properly.
Well, I was going to say that. Now, because our intellects, the human intellect, not the others, forms its ideas from the information brought to it by the senses. If the senses do not work, well, the intellect can't work properly. But the trouble is not with it, it's with the senses. So the intellect works dependently on the senses, and we call that a subjective dependence. Subjective dependence. It is dependent on the senses to bring its information. So it's subjectively dependent. Subjectively dependent on the body. That means on the senses, but the senses are dependent on the vegetative part of us. So it's dependent on the body, but not objectively dependent. I'll say what that means in a minute. Dependent on the body. So if we say the intellect is, that will make it intelligible. The intellect is subjectively dependent on the body, but not objectively dependent on the body. So now, because it is dependent on the body, if the body does not give it the right information, well, the intellect cannot work properly. But dependence doesn't mean identity. You see, because it is dependent on the body, it isn't identical with the body or with any sense whatever. It is independent. So, objectively. Now, what does objectively mean? Subjectively, I just said what it means. It means that for it to function, it's got to have the senses functioning, and functioning well for the intellect to function well. All right. Now, objectively dependent, the object is what the intellect knows. And what it knows, as I told you, goodness and happiness and all this, that's its object. Being, and there's no limit to that. What's the limit to being? Everything's a being, even God. There's no limit. So the intellect can have ideas that are without limit. Without limit, that's saying something, you know, without limit. So we can conceive all sorts of things, such as a cause. You know, we can say fire is the cause of the heat in the water. Can a dog say? No. Can a dog know what a cause is? Or an effect, for that matter? You see, they don't know that. We know all these things. We know the cause. We know the formal cause, the instrumental cause, the final cause. We can distinguish all these things because we have a mind, an intellect. You see, so our intellect. What I was saying before was that there are some philosophers that will talk about the intellect, but they don't mean an intellect. They mean an extra sense. They reduce the intellect to a sense. And so, once they do that, well, man is only an animal.
But then how can they include ideas, unlimited concepts?
Well, they say they don't. You see, when I say the universal dog or the universal animal, to make it clearer, you said you couldn't describe the universal animal, could you? Because every time you describe it's going to be this animal. You could only give me a definition of what it is. Isn't that right? Now, they say that there is no such thing as a universal. To get the universal, in other words, they say, for me to understand what animal is, I'd have to have the picture of every animal and superimpose one upon the other, and the result, that's the universal animal. Just like if you because they don't believe in intellect, they're sensists, or what we call them sometimes sensists, because they believe only in senses. We call them sensists, or we call them nominalists. They're the same people. Nominalists because they believe only in names. You see, so when you say animal, that's a shorthand way of saying a giraffe and an elephant and a rhinoceros and all that. So you say animal. But that's all it means. It doesn't mean that you understood a concept. And that is, that philosophy will lead you to the really morality of the gutter. Yeah, that's what we've got. I know that's what we've got. So you see, what really the intellect is a more noble power than the senses. It is the power that makes us like God. It is the biggest thing in man. Stock used to reckon, and I agree with you, I mean, I'm sure, he taught me, but everything in man is for the sake of his intellect. Everything. Your eyes and your ears and your legs and your feet and your nose and everything in you is for the sake of your intellect. So your intellect can...
With the sense of phenomenalists, then the intellect should have an organ. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So where is it?
I don't know, but you see, they don't argue like you. So you have, they are a different breed altogether, and it is true that that's why today, you see, what do they think about laws? You see, we base laws on natures, what things are. We don't expect a dog to behave like a man. We don't expect a man to behave like a dog. But today, they are saying a man can behave like a dog if he wants to. What's to stop
Anybody
him?
can do anything.
That's right. So they don't base laws on natures. They base them on wills.
So they call that freedom.
If you want to do it, yeah, they call that freedom because they haven't got. We're going to see a concept of freedom there. We don't have the right concept of freedom. We think that freedom is the power to do what you like. That's not the right concept of freedom. You can't do what you like anyway. Can a man go and jump off the gap and live?
The consequences are.
Well, you see, they don't treat physical law like that. You see, law, you have physical and moral law. Physical law, if you know, they don't go and say, well, I don't want to die, so I can eat poison and I won't die, because they know that physical laws work immediately, and therefore if they eat poison, they die. If they jump off the gap, they'll die.
Even
And
if they don't believe in gravity.
even if they don't believe in gravity, that's right, they know they'll die. So when we have law, we have physical law and moral law. But when it comes to moral law, because moral law, we don't get the retribution of that immediately, they just say, well, I'm free and I can do what I like. So man can live according to any lifestyle he likes.
But doesn't the guilt catch up with it?
Well, what's guilt?
Doesn't that lead to mental illness?
Yes, but that's why they think they can cure everything. That's why they get rid of guilt. That's why we have all the wrong psychology today that, is not to have a right psychology. It's got to be based on the real nature of man.
Excuse me, Alice. I remember Dr. Woodbury saying in his times that the philosophy that came out of Sydney University was nominalism, and that produced a lot of dangers in thinking of a lot of young people. And one of the reasons why he established the academy, might be many, was to combat that sort of thing that came out of university.
To combat that, because you see, today people think, and I'm sure there are many around, who think that they can convert the law, the world, by just doing theology, telling them what's right and what's wrong. But unless you can base your theological reason on sound philosophical reasoning, your theology just lacks a foundation, and therefore also it won't be right. And so we can't do without philosophy. That's why there was a lovely article by Bishop Bell in the Osservatore Romano. It made the Osservatore, but it didn't make the Catholic Weekly. That's true. Where he's saying that, in seminaries we have to teach philosophy. It was a good article, very good article. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Because philosophy is the study of everything according to our reason, using the natural principles, whereas theology is using revelation. And they think that they can bypass the philosophical part. And then, all this what we did tonight is more philosophy. You see, because we are reasoning to it. It's not revelation, but it agrees with revelation. To have the right philosophy, you have to have a philosophy that is in accord with revelation. But you have to have the right idea of man. You have to have the right idea of his senses, his passions, his emotions, all this, and then you can build up a science on it. But if your science is built on the wrong concept of man, if you take man to be just a glorified animal with an extra sense, that doesn't make him human, you see. Then you are going to have all the wrong morals, all the wrong psychology. Do you agree, Alex? Yes, he agrees. And you know, you've got to have your good psychology, yes, based on good moral philosophy and good moral, good philosophical psychology. You need those two to base it on in your metaphysics. But today they just go and say what they like about man. Each psychologist comes and finds some new befangled theory that he thinks is a step above all the others, and they make a lot of it, but he's not basing it on the real nature of man. And that's the trouble. And where do you get that? In philosophy.
Analysis.
No, that's true. And I was looking up canon law, and in canon law, in the new canon law, because I was saying this to somebody and said, you must have been looking up the old canon law. No, in the new canon law, it says that the teaching in seminaries, philosophy, and I think it says theology too, has to be based on St. Thomas.
Really?
Really. There you are. So you see, that's ignored. That's ignored because we have all the new philosophies today and you know, all the new ways of life, or lifestyles as they call them, and they don't want to let go of that. But that is even in the new, every pope has recommended St. Thomas since he died, but there we have the new canon law saying it. But how many people take notice of it? And I was delighted to see Bishop Bell write a thing like one of our Australian bishops recommending philosophy in seminaries. He considered the need for it. Anyway, we come back to our concepts. All these are concepts, you know, without giving you their ideas. So to have the right moral law, sorry, I meant here physical and moral law. To have the right moral law, especially, and that is into natural, and you can have supernatural, but or the one from will. But natural moral law, I'll put that because I don't want to make too many divisions. Natural moral law is going to be based on the nature of man, what man is. And what is man? You have to know what he is in his body and what he is in his soul and what he is for. See, that's why today we have so many people giving wrong advice and all that. We have counselors everywhere, but I don't know what they're worth. But all this wrong advice, why? Because, see, they make the end of man pleasure. Some of them, others might make it something else. So, you know, you go and fulfill all your desires, get what you want, and then you'll be happy, and then man finds he's not happy. Why? Because they don't understand what we were talking about today, that nothing short of the infinite can fulfill the infinite desire of man. You see, because we come back to St. Augustine. Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are not at rest until they rest in thee. Until we find God, which is the only infinite good, we cannot be, our hearts cannot be at rest, because that's their nature. They are made to, our will, when we talk about the heart loving and that's the will, but you know, because the heart is the central organ in the Bible and all that, we say we love with our heart and all this. That's all right if we understand it. Now, I was going to say something, it's gone out of my mind. Anyway, our hearts then, because they follow the intellect, and the intellect understands an infinite good. And you see, we are going to see about the freedom of the will. I don't think anybody here will deny the freedom of the will. We have to prove that we have. We're going to see that the will is free, but it's not free about absolutely everything. For example, it's not free about whether it wants to be happy or not. That's necessary. Every man wills to be happy, and every man cannot say it's indifferent to me whether I'm happy or not. He cannot say that truthfully. He can say it, right? But he cannot mean it. Because once saying the intellect is, the will is the appetite following upon intellect, upon understood good, what I understand to be good, I will it. And therefore every man from Adam to the very last man who will ever live will not be satisfied, fully satisfied, with anything less than an infinite good. So, St. Thomas puts it this way, will the addition of all finite goods, will the sum of them all add up to an infinite good? No. Exactly. So nothing short of God will ever satisfy the human will. Now I'll have to leave it there for tonight. I don't want to keep you too long. I wouldn't mind a bit of feedback on this. If you think it's too difficult or too deep, or you don't like too much philosophy, or just tell me, but don't just walk out and never come back. Okay.
Well, Victoria,
I'll pay you all that.
As long as you keep coming. Okay, now we'll say our prayers for the intentions of all here. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. The third sorrowful mystery, the crowning with thorns. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my
Jesus,
Jesus,
forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Bring all souls to heaven, especially those who most need thy mercy.
Our Lady, Saint of Grace,
Pray for us.
Saint Thomas Aquinas,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Now, before you go, those people who weren't here last week, I'm using this book